It was the summer of 1936 when a traveling photographer set up his equipment outside a juke joint in Clarksdale, Mississippi. The air hung thick and still, the kind of heat that made everything move slower, made sound travel different. 3 men stood in front of the weathered wooden wall, waiting for the flash. 2 of them were musicians, their shirts damp with sweat, guitars leaning against their legs. One of them was Robert Johnson. The other was a man named Johnny Shines. But there was a third figure in the frame, standing slightly behind them, just out of the light, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. His hands buried deep in the pockets of a dark suit that seemed too heavy for the Mississippi summer. Nobody who was there that day remembered him. Not the photographer, not the owner of the juke joint, not the dozen other people who had been standing around watching. But when the photograph was developed, there he was, clear as day, or rather clear as shadow, because his features were blurred just enough that you couldn't quite make them out. Just enough that you couldn't say for certain whether you'd recognize him if you saw him again. Just enough to make you wonder if he'd ever really been there at all. That photograph sat in a box for 60 years before anyone noticed, before anyone thought to ask who the third man was. And by then, it was too late to ask the people who should have known. They were all gone, but the photograph remained. And so did the third man, standing in the shadow, watching, always watching. This is Soul Chronicles, and this is the story of the man who appeared in every photograph of Robert Johnson, the man nobody remembered, the man nobody could identify, the man who may not have been a man at all. Before we step deeper into this shadow, if you're drawn to stories that live in the places history forgot, stories that make you question what's real and what's legend, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because here at Soul Chronicles, every episode takes you somewhere darker, somewhere older, somewhere the blues was born from something more than just music. Leave a comment and tell me which mystery you want uncovered next, because some stories don't just get told, they get remembered, and some of them never really ended. The first time anyone noticed the pattern was in 1998. A music historian named Dr. Helena Voss was compiling a definitive visual archive of Delta blues musicians for the Smithsonian. She'd gathered every known photograph of Robert Johnson. There weren't many. Johnson died young, died poor, died before anyone thought his image would matter to history. The official count was 3 confirmed photographs, maybe 4, depending on who you asked. Studio portraits mostly. Formal, stiff. The kind of picture a man got taken when he wanted to prove he was somebody. Dr. Voss laid them all out on her desk. She was looking for patterns, trying to date them, trying to figure out which photograph was taken first, which was taken last, trying to piece together a visual timeline of a man who barely left a mark on the world while he was alive. And that's when she saw him. In the corner of the first photograph, a figure, barely visible, standing just outside the main frame. She thought it was a studio assistant at first, someone who'd wandered into the shot by accident. She made a note and moved on. Then she looked at the second photograph. Different studio, different city, different year as far as anyone could tell. And there he was again, same dark suit, same low-brimmed hat, same blurred, indistinct features, standing in almost the exact same position relative to Johnson. Slightly behind, slightly to the left, just at the edge of visibility. Dr. Voss stopped, put down her magnifying glass, picked it up again, looked closer. The figure was too similar to be coincidence, but it couldn't be the same man. These photographs were taken months apart, hundreds of miles apart, by different photographers who didn't know each other, who ran studios in towns that barely had telephone lines connecting them. She pulled out the third photograph, the one that some experts disputed, the one where Johnson's face was turned away from the camera, making positive identification difficult. And there, in the background, standing near a doorway, was the same figure, same suit, same hat, same impossible presence. Dr. Voss spent the next 3 months tracking down every photograph that might possibly show Robert Johnson. She traveled to Mississippi, to Memphis, to Arkansas. She knocked on doors. She searched through attics and shoeboxes and family albums that hadn't been opened in decades. She found photographs that had never been catalogued, images that had never been seen by scholars. Candid shots taken at juke joints and street corners, group photos with other musicians, blurry snapshots taken by amateurs with cheap cameras. And in every single one, somewhere in the frame, was the third man. Sometimes he was clear enough to see the outline of his suit, the shape of his hat. Sometimes he was just a dark smudge in the corner. Sometimes he was visible only as a reflection in a window or a shadow on a wall. But he was always there, in every image, without exception. And nobody, not one single person who appeared in those photographs, not one surviving witness who had been present when they were taken, could remember him. By the year 2000, Dr. Voss had documented 47 photographs containing images of Robert Johnson. This was more than anyone knew existed. Hidden photographs, private collections, images that families had kept without knowing their historical significance. And in all 47, the third man appeared, always watching, always present, always just out of focus. She published her findings in the Journal of American Folklore. The article was titled "The Shadow Figure in Johnson Photographs, a Study in Photographic Anomaly and Collective Memory." The academic world largely ignored it. A few blues historians took note. Conspiracy theorists had a field day. Someone started a website claiming the third man was a time traveler. Someone else said he was a government agent tracking Johnson for reasons lost to history. A paranormal investigator from California called Dr. Voss and told her with absolute certainty that the figure was a demon. Proof that the Crossroads legend was real, that Johnson had made a deal, that the third man was there to collect. Dr. Voss didn't believe in demons. She believed in evidence, in documentation, in following the trail wherever it led, no matter how strange it got. And the trail was getting very strange indeed. She began interviewing elderly residents of the Mississippi Delta, people who had been alive when Johnson was. People who might remember something, anything, about a man in a dark suit who seemed to appear wherever Johnson played. Most of them were in their 80s and 90s now. Their memories were unreliable. They confused dates and places and names. But when she showed them the photographs, something changed. One woman, 91 years old, living in a nursing home in Greenwood, Mississippi, looked at the image for nearly 5 minutes without speaking. Then she said, "I remember the feeling." Dr. Voss leaned forward. "What feeling?" The woman's hands shook slightly as she held the photograph, like being watched, like there was always someone standing behind you, even when the room was empty. "We used to talk about it. All us girls who'd go hear the blues men play, we'd say, 'You feel that cold spot, that heaviness,' and we'd all feel it. But we never saw nothing, not directly, just out of the corner of your eye, just a shadow that moved wrong." Another man, 87, a retired sharecropper who'd worked the cotton fields around Clarksdale his whole life, told Dr. Voss, "My daddy used to play with Robert. Not regular, just sometimes when Robert came through. And my daddy said Robert had something following him. Something that wasn't natural. He said you could see it in photographs, that cameras could catch things the eye couldn't. He said Robert knew it was there, that Robert talked to it sometimes late at night when he thought nobody was listening, called it his shadow, his companion, his witness." Dr. Voss asked what Robert said to it. The old man shook his head. "My daddy never said it wasn't his business, said there were things about Robert Johnson that weren't meant to be understood, just accepted." The more people Dr. Voss talked to, the more consistent the stories became. Not about seeing the man, nobody saw him, but about feeling him, about knowing he was there, about the way the air changed when Robert Johnson played, about the sense that something invisible had walked into the room and taken up space. One woman said, "It was like Robert was playing for an audience we couldn't see, like he was always aware of something watching him, something that mattered more than the crowd, more than the money, more than anything." Another said, sometimes in the middle of a song, he'd stop and look at empty space, just for a second, like he was checking to make sure something was still there, and then he'd nod, real slight, and keep playing. A third witness, a man who'd been 12 years old when he saw Johnson play at a house party in Robinsonville, said, "I remember my mama grabbing my arm real tight when Robert started playing. She whispered, 'Don't look at the corner. Don't look directly.' But I did. I couldn't help it. And there was nothing there, just shadows. But the shadows were wrong. They moved when nothing was moving. And I swear I heard breathing, real slow, real steady, like something patient was standing there, waiting." Dr. Voss started having dreams. She'd be standing in a crowded juke joint, the air thick with smoke and sweat and the smell of corn whiskey. Robert Johnson on a wooden chair in the corner, guitar across his knee, singing "Me and the Devil Blues." And there, standing against the back wall, was the third man, clear as anyone, face still shadowed, but present, solid, real. And in the dream, Dr. Voss would walk toward him, push through the crowd, reach out to tap his shoulder, and the moment her fingers touched the fabric of his suit, she'd wake up, heart racing, breath caught in her throat, the room around her too quiet, too still, like something had just left. She told herself it was stress. Too many hours looking at old photographs, too much time thinking about a dead man and his impossible shadow. But the dreams kept coming, and they got more specific, more detailed. In one dream, she saw the third man's hands. They were pale, the fingers long and thin. In another dream, she saw his shoes, expensive leather, polished to a mirror shine. Too nice for Mississippi in the Depression, too fine for the dirt roads and juke joints where Robert Johnson played. Then came the night she saw his face. It was the same dream, the same juke joint, the same crowd. But this time, when she looked at the third man, the shadow was gone. The hat was tilted back, and she could see his features. They were sharp, angular, handsome in a way that felt wrong, too perfect, too symmetrical. His eyes were dark, not brown, not black, just dark, like looking into a well with no bottom. And he was smiling, not a friendly smile, not a cruel smile, just a smile that said, "I've been waiting for you to see me." Dr. Voss woke up screaming. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night, didn't sleep much for the next week. She tried to sketch the face from memory, but every time she put pencil to paper, her hand cramped. The lines came out wrong. The proportions didn't work. It was like her mind couldn't hold the image long enough to translate it into something real. She decided to stop researching, to let it go, to move on to other projects. But 3 days later, a package arrived at her office. No return address, no note, just a photograph. It was Robert Johnson, standing in front of a building she didn't recognize. The photograph was in color, which was impossible. Color photography existed in the 30s, but it was rare, expensive. Certainly not used for casual snapshots of itinerant blues musicians. But there it was, Johnson in a brown jacket, his guitar case on the ground beside him, and standing behind him, clear as day, in perfect focus for the first time in any photograph Dr. Voss had ever seen, was the third man. She could see his face, every detail, the sharp cheekbones, the thin lips, the dark, bottomless eyes. He was looking directly at the camera, directly at whoever was taking the picture, directly it felt at Dr. Voss herself, 60 years into the future, and his expression was the same as in the dream. That same smile, that same sense of patient, eternal waiting. Dr. Voss took the photograph to a forensic lab. She needed to know if it was real, if it had been doctored, if someone was playing an elaborate hoax on her. The technicians analyzed it for 3 weeks. They checked for signs of digital manipulation, for evidence of photographic alteration, for any indication that the image had been faked or forged. They found nothing. The photograph appeared to be authentic. The paper was consistent with 1930s stock. The chemical composition of the developing process matched the period. Even the aging patterns, the way the colors had faded, the slight yellowing at the edges, all of it was consistent with a photograph that was genuinely 70 years old. But color photographs of Robert Johnson didn't exist. At least none that anyone knew about, and photographs where the third man was in perfect focus, where his face was clearly visible, those definitely didn't exist. Until now. Dr. Voss published a follow-up article. She included a reproduction of the photograph. The response was immediate and divided. Half the academic community accused her of fraud, said she'd fabricated the image to support a wild theory. The other half was silent, unsettled. A few colleagues reached out privately. One said, "I've seen him too, not in photographs, in person. I was doing fieldwork in Mississippi 10 years ago, interviewing an old woman about chain gang work songs. And while we were talking, I saw a man standing across the street, dark suit, hat pulled low, just watching us. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but I took a picture of the woman for my records, and when I developed the film, he was in the background. Same man, same expression. And I swear he wasn't there when I took the shot. I would have remembered." Another colleague, a professor of folklore at a university in Louisiana, sent Dr. Voss a package. Inside were copies of 3 photographs, not of Robert Johnson, of other blues musicians, Charlie Patton, Son House, Skip James. And in the background of each photograph, barely visible, was the same figure, same suit, same hat, same blurred, indistinct face. The professor's note said, "I think he's been following the blues for a long time. Longer than Johnson, maybe longer than any of them. I don't know who he is. I don't know what he is, but he's there. In the photographs, in the stories, in the spaces between the notes, and I don't think he's finished." Dr. Voss began compiling a secondary archive, not just of Robert Johnson photographs, but of any image from any period that showed the third man. She found him in a photograph from 1928, standing behind Ma Rainey at a recording session in Chicago. She found him in an image from 1945, in the background of a USO show where a young Muddy Waters was playing for soldiers. She found him in photographs from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, always in images related to the blues, always standing at the edge of the frame, always watching. The pattern suggested he wasn't tied to Robert Johnson specifically. He was tied to something larger, the blues itself maybe, the tradition, the lineage, the unbroken chain of musicians who played music that came from suffering and transcended it. Music that spoke to something ancient and true and impossible to fake. Dr. Voss traveled to Chicago and interviewed an 84-year-old woman named Ruth, who had been a session singer in the 40s and 50s. Ruth had sung backup for Howlin' Wolf, Little Walter, and dozens of other blues legends. When Dr. Voss showed her the photographs, Ruth went pale. She set the images down carefully and folded her hands in her lap. "That's the Watcher," she said. "We all knew about him. Not by name, nobody knew his name, but we knew he was there. The musicians who were serious, who really had it, they could feel him. Some of them said he was good luck. Some said he was a test. Some said if you saw him, really saw him, it meant you'd given everything to the music, that there was nothing left of you that wasn't blues." Dr. Voss asked if Ruth had ever seen him. Ruth nodded slowly. "Once. I was singing backup on a Howlin' Wolf session. Late at night, studio mostly empty, just us and the engineer. And Wolf stopped in the middle of a take, just stopped. And he stared at the corner of the room. I looked where he was looking, and for just a second I saw a man, dark suit, dark hat, and then he was gone. Wolf didn't say anything, just counted us back in and we finished the song. But after, when we were packing up, Wolf pulled me aside. He said, "You saw him, didn't you?" I nodded, and Wolf said, "That means you're real. That means what you're doing matters. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever take it lightly." Ruth leaned forward and looked directly at Dr. Voss. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? The Watcher doesn't show up for everybody, only for the ones who give everything, the ones who play like their life depends on it, like their soul depends on it. And if he's in all those photographs, if he followed Robert Johnson everywhere, that tells you something. That tells you Johnson wasn't just good, he was chosen, or cursed, or maybe there's no difference." Dr. Voss asked one more question. "Is he dangerous?" Ruth thought about it for a long time. Then she said, "I don't think so. Not in the way you mean. He doesn't hurt people. He doesn't interfere. He just watches. He bears witness. And maybe that's the most dangerous thing of all. Being seen, really seen, by something that knows exactly what you gave up to make the music, what you sacrificed, what you lost. Maybe some people can't handle being seen like that." Dr. Voss stopped publishing, stopped giving interviews. She kept researching, but privately. She filled journals with notes and theories and questions that had no answers. She traveled back to Mississippi one more time, drove down Highway 61, the same roads Robert Johnson would have walked, stopped at the crossroads near Clarksdale, where legend says Johnson made his deal. The place where the devil supposedly taught him to play guitar in exchange for his soul. She stood there at midnight, alone, the road empty in both directions, the sky vast and black and filled with stars, and she waited. For what? She wasn't sure. For a sign, for an answer, for the third man to appear and explain himself. Nothing happened. Just the wind through the cotton fields, just the distant sound of a train whistle, just the weight of history pressing down on a place where too many stories had been born and died without ever being fully told. But when she got back to her car, there was something on the windshield, a photograph wedged under the wiper blade. It was her, standing at the crossroads, taken from behind. She was looking down the road, her back to the camera, and standing beside her, just out of arm's reach, was the third man. She could see his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the brim of his hat. And she could see that he was looking at her, not at the camera, at her, as if he'd known she would turn, as if he'd been waiting for that exact moment. Dr. Voss got in her car and drove. She didn't stop until she reached Memphis. She checked into a hotel and sat on the bed with the photograph in her hands. She stared at it for hours, and slowly something shifted in her understanding. The third man wasn't following Robert Johnson. He wasn't haunting him or cursing him or collecting on some dark bargain. He was bearing witness. He was the record keeper, the one who made sure that what Johnson did, what all the great ones did, was seen, was acknowledged, was remembered. Because the blues came from invisibility, from people who history tried to erase, from voices that were meant to be forgotten. And maybe the third man was the answer to that erasure, the guarantee that no matter what, someone was watching. Someone was listening, someone would remember. Dr. Voss never went back to Mississippi. She moved to California, changed her focus to folk music of the Appalachian Mountains, avoided anything related to the Delta blues. When colleagues asked why, she'd changed the subject. The journals she kept were never published, never catalogued. When she died in 2015, her family donated her research materials to a university archive. But the box labeled Johnson Shadow Project was empty, just a note inside that said, "Some things aren't meant to be solved, some doors aren't meant to be opened. Let him rest, let them all rest." But the photographs remain, 47 images, maybe more by now, scattered across archives and private collections and shoeboxes in Mississippi attics, and in every one, the third man stands, watching, waiting, present in a way that defies explanation, present in a way that suggests he's not bound by the same rules as the rest of us. Not bound by time, not bound by space, not bound by whatever separates the living from everything else. There are people who say he's still there, that if you go to the places where Robert Johnson played, where those photographs were taken, you can feel him, that cold spot, that heaviness in the air, that sense of being watched by something that sees more than it should. There are musicians who claim they've seen him, a figure in the back of the room during late-night sessions. A shadow that doesn't match the light, a presence that makes the strings ring different, makes the notes hang longer, makes the blues feel deeper, older, truer than it should. And there are photographers who found him in their images. Not of Robert Johnson, obviously. Johnson's been dead for 87 years, but in photographs of other musicians, other blues players, other people who channel something raw and ancient and true through their instruments, in the background, in the shadows, sometimes just a blur, sometimes clear enough to see the outline of his suit, his hat, the suggestion of his face, always watching, always present, always there. In 2009, a young photographer named Marcus Chen was documenting a blues festival in Helena, Arkansas. He was shooting digital, taking hundreds of images over the course of 2 days. Musicians on stage, crowds dancing, the atmosphere of a tradition that refused to die. When he got home and started editing the photographs, he noticed something strange. In 17 different images, taken at different times, in different locations around the festival grounds, there was a man in a dark suit, always in the background, always slightly out of focus, always alone. Marcus assumed it was just a festival attendee, someone who happened to be in a lot of places, but when he looked closer, he realized the man's position in each photograph was impossible. In one image, he was stage left during a performance at 2 in the afternoon. In another image, taken 30 seconds later from a different angle, he was stage right. There was no way someone could move that fast through a crowded festival. No way to be in 2 places, essentially at once. Marcus posted the images online, asking if anyone knew who the man was. Within hours, someone sent him a link to Dr. Voss's original article. Marcus spent the next week reading everything he could find about the third man. Then he went through his entire archive of blues photography, 6 years worth of images, festivals, clubs, street performances, recording sessions. And he found the man in 43 photographs, always in the background, always watching, always impossible to identify. Marcus tried to contact Dr. Voss. He found out she'd died. He tried to find her research. He found out it had disappeared. So he started his own investigation. He reached out to other photographers, asked if they'd ever noticed a recurring figure in their blues photography. The responses were mixed. Some people thought he was crazy, but others sent him images, dozens of them, all containing the same figure, same suit, same hat, same impossible presence across decades and locations. Marcus compiled everything into a website. He called it the Witness Project. He posted every photograph he could verify, every testimony from musicians and photographers and witnesses who had felt the presence or seen the shadow or found the figure in their images. The website got millions of hits in the first month. Then it got hacked. All the images deleted, all the testimonies erased. The site went down and never came back up. Marcus received a package a week later. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Marcus sitting at his computer, working on the website, and standing behind him, visible in the reflection of his monitor, was the third man. Marcus shut down the project. He never spoke about it publicly again. But privately, he told friends, "I think he didn't want to be exposed, not because he's hiding, but because being seen, really seen, would change something, would break something. He exists in the shadows because that's where he belongs. That's where the blues lives, in the spaces between things, in the margins, in the places we don't look directly at, and maybe trying to drag him into the light, trying to make him explain himself, that's missing the point. He's not the mystery, He's the answer to a different question, the question of who remembers, who bears witness, who makes sure that what was given wasn't given for nothing. Who was the third man in every photograph of Robert Johnson? Nobody knows, but he was there. The photographs prove it. The witnesses remember it, even if they can't remember him. And somewhere, in an archive or an attic or a shoebox that hasn't been opened yet, there might be another photograph, another image of Robert Johnson. And in it, standing in the shadow, watching with those dark and bottomless eyes, will be the third man, still there, still present, still waiting for someone to finally understand, or to finally stop trying. The legend says Robert Johnson sold his soul at the crossroads, but maybe the truth is stranger. Maybe he gave something else, something we don't have a name for, and maybe the third man is there to make sure the bargain holds, that what was given stays given, that what was received keeps being paid for year after year, photograph after photograph, generation after generation of people who listen to the music and feel something they can't explain. Something watching, something present, something that sounds like the blues and looks like a shadow and exists in the places between what we know and what we fear. Because that's what the blues is. It's the sound of being seen by something larger than yourself, the sound of being witnessed in your suffering and your transcendence, the sound of mattering even when history says you don't, even when the world says you're invisible. And if the third man is the keeper of that witness, the guardian of that seeing, then maybe his presence in every photograph isn't a curse or a haunting. Maybe it's a promise, a guarantee that the music matters, that the musicians matter, that what they gave, what they sacrificed, what they poured into those songs, someone was there to see it, someone was there to remember. Someone will always be there. And that might be the most important thing, not the mystery of who he is, but the certainty that he's there, that the blues, no matter how invisible or marginalized or forgotten its creators might be, the blues itself is witnessed, is seen, is remembered by something that doesn't forget. If this story left you with more questions than answers, if you felt something cold at the back of your neck while listening, then you know why Soul Chronicles exists. This is where the legends live, where the mysteries refuse to die, where every song has a shadow and every shadow has a story. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Drop a comment and tell me what mystery you want explored next. What legend keeps you up at night? What story from the blues needs to be told? Because every soul has a song, and some of them are still playing.